Bienvenidos and welcome everyone to the Central Coast State Park Association's first Mind Walk lecture of 2025. We thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your busy lives to hopefully learn and find inspiration and connect with the topics that we bring to you as part of our Mind Walk lecture series. My name's Sierra Emmerich. I'm the Executive Director of Central Coast State Parks Association. It's a really long name, so we often just say CSPA. And I'm thrilled to be joined by our intern Kendall Rosen, Latino Outdoors founder Jose Gonzalez, and Latino Outdoors program coordinator Celeste Royers. I want to say we're just really proud to be starting the year off in partnership with Latino Outdoors, as it's both our mission, Central Coast State Parks mission, and Latino Outdoors mission to inspire, connect, and engage all communities, including the Latino community, in our outdoors and embrace cultura y familia, culture and family, as part of the outdoor narrative, ensuring that everybody's history, heritage, and leadership are valued and represented. Parks are here for everybody, and unfortunately, not everyone has been included or made to feel welcome, at least, in our park spaces. And we're here to change that. And it's our goal to ensure that park spaces provide this high quality space for recreation and education. And I would argue a healing space for everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that with the LA fires and the recent election, this is a particularly hard time for many communities, especially Latino communities and our friends and family in the LA area. And I just want to let you know that our hearts are with you during these difficult times, and that we hope that park spaces can offer relief and joy and even healing during these times. So today's Mind Walk with presenter Jose Gonzalez focuses on strengthening our values of familia, comunidad, cultura, so family, community, culture, access, diversity, and lifelong learning. And after the talk, I encourage you all to connect with your local state parks and their state park partners, so like the Friends of groups, like CSPA, to continue our collective work to have meaningful experiences in our state parks, whether that connection looks like a picnic or a walk in the park or joining the board of directors for a group like CSPA. We need your voices. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and I will pass it over to Kendall to tell you a little bit more about CSPA and about Mind Walks.
Hi everyone, my name's Kendall. I'm part of CSPA's events team. For those of you just learning about CSPA and Mind Walks, I just wanted to give us a sort of brief introduction. CSPA supports the 10 state parks in San Luis Obispo County in their interpretation, education, and volunteer efforts. We are one of 89 similar cooperating associations across the state who work in partnership with state parks. Like Sierra mentioned, we encourage all of you to connect with your local parks and their supporting associations to see what events, activities, and open spaces are available to you wherever you may be. This evening, you will be enjoying one of our Mind Walk lectures. So the Mind Walk lecture series program features a variety of topics aimed at stretching the mind of the lifelong learner. This lecture series offers quarterly educational opportunities devoted to recreational, natural, and cultural history topics as they relate to the Central Coast. Both Latino Outdoors and CSPA aim to connect and engage all communities in the outdoors, which is why we are so excited about this partnership, and we look forward to continuing our work together in the future. Looking ahead a little bit, if you live on the Central Coast or nearby, on Saturday, February 8th, we are having an interpretive guided experience at the Pismo State Beach Monarch Butterfly Grove at 10 a.m. Please join us if you're able. You can find more information about this on our website. To find out even more about us, once again, check out our website, sign up for our newsletter. To support us, please keep coming to Mind Walks, buy from our nature stores, become a friend of CSPA, buy firewood from our state campgrounds, or donate online. And with all that said, I would like to hand things over to Latino Outdoors Program Coordinator Celeste Royers to introduce the organization and our wonderful speaker today, Jose Gonzalez.
All right. Thanks, Kendall. If you could go ahead and advance it, I think I have an intro slide just so folks can see. But welcome everybody this evening. My name is Celeste Royer. I am the Central Coast, one of the Central Coast chapter volunteers, trying to promote getting the Latino community into our beautiful outdoor spaces on the California Central Coast. Jose and I have been friends for many, many years. And I remember promising him that when I retired and had a little bit more time on my hands, that I would make sure that Latino Outdoors was represented very well here on the Central Coast. And so great with you to be with you this evening and in partnership with Central Coast State Parks Association. So a little bit about Jose. Jose is the founder of Latino Outdoors and happens to also be the co-founder of the Outdoors Oath, along with a former partner from the Avarna Group. He is a professional educator with training in the fields of education and conservation while engaging in very different artistic endeavors with art and messaging, often exploring the intersection of the environment and culture. As a partner in the Avarna Group and through his own consulting, his work focused on equity and inclusion frameworks and practices in the environmental, outdoor, and conservation fields. He's also an illustrator and science communicator and excellent at both. He currently serves as the inaugural equity officer for the East Bay Regional Park District. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of California, Davis, and his Master of Science at the University of Michigan School of Natural Resources and the Environment. His teaching coursework was at the Bilingual Multicultural Education Department at Sacramento State. Currently, Jose serves on boards, in particular for Parks California and Resource Media, along with being a commissioner for California Boating and Waterways Commission. Very honored and grateful to have Jose with us this evening. And so welcome, Jose, and I'll hand this off to you.
Oh, muchas gracias, Celeste. I am excited that kind of that offer and promise from years ago is mutual, right? That as remember Celeste, you say, yeah, I'll be once I retire. Yeah, which was years so far at that time. And then I'm thinking, oh, we're trying to build this. And you also kind of being so excited to be like, yeah, what is this going to be? And here we are. So I'm going to loop back to this because when, Celeste reached out to say, would you mind helping with this or participating? It's both always an easy yes. And then also knowing because it's anchored around trying to continue to, be a resource to the community that we've all built. So with that in mind, I've got a couple of slides that I'll kind of walk through, knowing it's just one tidbit, and so that there's an opportunity for Q&A. So let me start there. Okay. So it should now be visible there for you all. This is me a few years ago running as part of a colleague, Faith Briggs, doing a film called This Land. And here we are running a segment in New Mexico, by near Las Cruces, in kind of the Organ Mountain Peaks National Monument. So, but I like this photo because it kind of represents a bit of where we are and where we're going, but also not what I was sure that I would be doing, but I'm excited that I am, and that is kind of a little bit part of the Latino outdoor story. So I'll start a little bit kind of when thinking about this, right? It's called Yo Cuento, a wayfinding story. And so, as I say, mind walk with me on this one, which is I was born in Mexico and came over to the US in California in the Central Valley at the age of 9. And that meant that I was kind of trying to unpack and figure out what my cultural wayfinding was. Like, what was that identity for me? In other words, I understood what it meant to some degree to be Mexican by birth nationality. But then coming to the US and then having the introduction and association to Latinidad as a cultural construct. So what does it mean now to be Latino? Um, and then figuring out what that meant as a positive attribute. And so in adapting kind of to all of these cultural cues of being in the US, right? Being an immigrant, growing up, trying to figure out what any element of being bilingual meant, navigating the school system as the oldest of all my siblings, as the one trying to figure this out. And of course, not having all the language, not knowing all of the ways to describe what it meant to kind of unpack this culturally. Now I do. But as a kid growing up and then proceeding through the educational system, I didn't know that what I was working through was this aspect of code switching. And code switching in the sense of um, definitely linguistic code switching, where it originates from. And that is you're being able to mix your English and your Spanish. So you're pero like, o así es, kind of like this, um, into what now is, more understood as cultural code switching, which means being able to switch in terms of some of these cultural cues. And so for me, that meant what it meant to kind of like navigate some English dominant spaces, as well as have some very Spanish and Mexican dominant spaces. So that meant at home, for example, speaking Spanish with parents, but then primarily speaking English in most classes in school, having my Mexican friends for some things, but then having my non-Mexican friends for other things. And those early adaptation was what I would say it's more cultural code switching for survival, which is how do you fit in to not necessarily stand out. And why this was helpful was what ultimately led to the founding of Latino Outdoors. And I think what it offers, one of those things, is code switching for thriving. So not just for surviving, but for thriving. To be able to know that we have the opportunity to leverage all these different aspects of ourselves. And that for me, that meant kind of like unpacking what this idea of ambicultural liderazgo, ambicultural leadership could be like. And so that we would begin to move away from this identity of, or this expression of ni de aquí ni de allá, neither from here nor there, which tends to be a common kind of expression of like feeling this tension of, do I fit in more, in this space, or do I fit in more in that space? And really to think about how can I be de aquí y de allá, from here and there, as a way to be able to think you don't have to be monolingual. You can be bilingual. You can be multilingual. So I put this here because those were those early figuring outs for me and what it meant to like school and be nerdy. But of course, being a Latino nerd in that way, and ultimately what it meant to kind of like be interested in this outdoorsy stuff. And so in terms of getting those early introductions through school and through a few other experiences to this idea of the outdoors, and then of course connecting my cultural wayfinding in terms of Latinidad with this additional expression of quote unquote the outdoors, which is again another social cultural construct of the outdoors. And beginning to ask those questions of where are there others like me? Of course, there's always been people like me. Celeste is a beautiful example of that. And in one of the first times we met, having her share with me, be like, wow, there's a few of us and we've been wanting to do something like this. But maybe some of the platforms weren't there to facilitate those connections yet. Or maybe some of the structural pieces weren't there yet. But that doesn't mean that there haven't been individuals that have this affinity and this kind of calling. And so for me, I was thinking, again, what does this mean? Not just in terms of my own individual type of personal figuring it out, but it's began the process of understanding structurally and systemically why is it this way? So hence this question. And so I'm actually sharing with you some of the early slides from the early Latino Outdoors presentations. So we're going back to 2013, 2014, um, to share a little bit, right, of how I was expressing and unpacking some of this. And so hence this question. Because people will say, well, why a Latino outdoors? And I was like, well, here's one starting point. If we know interest and concern is high for BIPOC, so in terms of Black, Indigenous, people of color, communities of color that identify very in terms of ethnically and racially diverse demographics. So what research was slowly beginning to show, we're talking like 2008 was one of the very first surveys, and then it really got going after 2012. And now we have a lot of these surveys and polls that basically show this. We know the interest and concern and even willingness to act is there. And yet, why were we still facing this question of structural underrepresentation? To still feel like I don't see others like me in some of these spaces and positions and roles. And so that led, and by the way, this is some amazing friends and colleagues out in Tucson. Borrachos Verde, if you follow him on social media. And this is a little illustration that I did over a photo of them to kind of, stress that connection of uh, contemporary, kind of contemporary codices. What does it mean to be grounded with the land, with nature now, connected still to a lot of our ancestral energy and heritage and indigeneity, and that this all gets to be a part of it. And we were doing this in the context of understanding that Latinidad is messy. And to this day, of course, it for me, it isn't about what is the right word. And that's a whole other conversation, which I'm happy maybe it comes up in Q&A as to like, well, how do we end up with Latino outdoors? And that was a strategic choice, but it was a recognition that there's this whole fluidity and spectrum of identification that to me will continue to evolve, which is awesome because that is part of identity, is part of language, is part of community building. But for me, I was navigating this for myself at the same time, saying I'm Mexican by birth nationality, Latino through social cultural identity, Chicano through social political identity, Hispanic by census count, US citizen through naturalization, and so forth. And so, how could I hold that multitude? But at least I recognized that this idea of Latinidad was something that didn't need to be fixed and static, even as we were going to be creating this central connecting. And so that began a journey, which I can share with this now as a model of really thinking what are the shifts that we were going to be undertaking. So this is FSG water systems change to kind of sometimes help map a little bit as to why we do the work that we do, but also I think the way that Latino Outdoors anchors around some of this. The structural is the explicit because it's either there or it's not. Something like Latino Outdoors either exists or it doesn't. There's either money for a program or there's no money for a program. And I think that for me, it started by going onto search engine, which I think at that time was Google, and typing in Latinos and outdoors back in 2012, and not really finding that central point. And I wish I would have saved a screenshot of that from then, because I think that would be a really good comparative example. But I think the structural pieces was exactly that, inviting a community to co-create this and having something like Latino Outdoors exist now in a way that it didn't before. The relational pieces are semi-explicit because they're both there, but they're a little harder to tease out, but you know they matter. So things like trust, things like relationships, things like community building, and power dynamics. So for me, thinking I want our community to not just be objects of programming. It isn't just about taking families and kids of colors to the outdoors. It's about who is also doing the leading, who is in some of those decision-making spaces to be able to do that. And I think that's another powerful testament to the work of Latino Outdoors. And for example, having someone like Celeste, all of the amazing volunteer leaders that are the leaders that are in these positions to be able to shape and co-create the programming and offer that. And then the mental models was also very early on what we were facing, because questions such as, well, do Latina communities care about the outdoors? And thinking, well, what does it mean to shift that question to how do they care? And how do they care in ways that we may not know? Right. And so those shifts matter because they could unpack a lot of the work that we would begin. And that I think that the community of Latino Outdoors right now does fantastic just to be able to show and demonstrate what this could look like in a way that's not prescriptive, but maybe gets people to think about that differently. And so I started early with something like this, an example. So again, this is from the first presentations. And I would ask, okay, April 22nd, 1970, and especially with conservation and environmental audiences, I would ask, what is what comes to mind with this date? And especially when I put a picture like this. And people, of course, would mention Earth Day, and they're correct. That picture of the Earth from space is famous in association with that. And then, of course, you see the kids planting the trees, but that's not from Earth Day. It is from the same day, April 22nd, 1970, but it's the founding of Chicano Park in San Diego. And so here is a great example of what it meant to have this connection to land, this support for parks, but also grounded in community organizing, cultural kind of identity, and that presence that isn't entirely uh, identified as conservationists or environmentalists in the way that people would presume. Also, at the same time, there actually were Chicano organizers for Earth Day. In Albuquerque, for example, you can read some of those initial speeches by Arturo Sandoval, for example, that organized one of those first Earth Day, founding Earth Day activities. That's what I mean about these shifts, about how we've been present in some of this work, even though some people always presume we're new to it. The other one is thinking of Rachel Carson, right? And the powerful role she's played in what eventually would lead to the banning of DDT. And so this is part of that story, that it's environmental success, the birds are in danger, we need to ban DDT, and then here comes an organization like Environmental Defense Fund that's critical to the banning. But what often gets left out is that it wasn't just Environmental Defense Fund. It wasn't just Rachel Carson. RASA were part of this. We're talking about the UFW and California Rural Legal Assistance being part of this fight and this work as well. The 6 migrant farm workers that were the base for the lawsuit that ultimately did lead to the banning of DDT. And so knowing that this helped EDF with their lawsuit, and that actually led to the banning of DDT. But it's that reminder again of power dynamics, right? That why don't we remember the farm workers as part of the struggle in the same way that we remember traditional conservationists and environmentalists? And what does it mean for farm workers to try to express this power, which continues to today, of course? And so that for me was kind of part of the outdoor story as well, right? To say, what does it mean to both, of course, create and be here now and be seen as new, but know it's part of a longer story and history of this work. So here are those books in case people are more interested. And then lastly, with this idea of, we've been here, we are here, and yet pressing this story around always being maybe perceived as new and immigrant in that way, which continues to this day. So this was also an early slide from back in the day that was around this idea that quote unquote Latinos Hispanic in California would become the plurality. And this finally did happen back in 2013, 2014. But the fact that this was the story, right? Will become the biggest ethnic group in California, surpassing whites for the first time. It leaves out the fact that this isn't the first time. It'd be the second, maybe the third time. But this was the kind of narrative that we were looking not just to challenge, but redefine and expand from. And in the context of outdoors this is from Charles Thomas, the executive director of Outward Bound Adventures out in LA. Please support their work, and especially him, because they were affected by the wildfires. And this idea that when we do this work, it can be easy to just focus on the intentional users, like the people that you feel maybe already get it, maybe some of us that are already outdoorsy a little bit. But what does it mean to not just do that, to really think about the whole spectrum about why the various aspects of the community, maybe non-intentional users, non-intentional non-users, and then especially intentional non-users. And so this, for example, would come up in our own community engagement efforts when you, as well as the narrative, when you had people say, why would I want to sleep outdoors? The whole point was to not sleep outdoors, is to sleep indoors. Questions like, well, what about somebody that's already been working a long day out in the fields and you're asking them to like go out on a hike? And so it's that both and recognizing the reality of why comments like that exist and that they're grounded in a lot of truth for a lot of people and lived experience. But also, how do you expand from that? And so I tell people, it's like, how do you work, for example, with the family for whom that's reality? So you recognize the outdoor labor that they associate with the outdoors, but also add in the outdoor leisure that they deserve and outdoor love that is also they should have a right to. So yes, you might be laboring out in the outdoors, and also you should benefit from the benefits of being out the outdoors in recreational and very joyful experiences. And that's what excites me about what so much just all the programming that you see and all of the Latino outdoors leaders, like this is what they invite the community into. And it's just so beautiful and powerful to see that. And as we're doing this work, connecting with other amazing individuals who kind of like we built these connections. This is, I'll kind of read this a little bit right here. I am a Latino who is passionate about conservation. As a conservation biologist, I feel like I need to give back to the natural surroundings and wildlife that inspire and drive my career. As a proud Latino, I know I would not be where I am today without my Latino upbringing and influences. To be honest, there are not very many Latinos in science or the field of conservation, so I feel a personal responsibility to work equally hard on my work as a conservation biologist as I do as a future Latino role model and educator. I purposely changed the trajectory of my career so that I could fulfill both of these goals and impacts, as well as join both of these communities. Now, if you know who this individual is, you kind of get to see that. And if you don't, we'll come back at the end. Maybe someone will share his name in the comments. But he's, for example, highly influential of the work behind P22, the mountain lion, and down in the Santa Monica Mountains. But they spoke to me because this is how I felt represented. And so part of a lot of that early work that continues to today is knowing this, right? Finding others like you. And now we are helping each other and building some of these connections. And then as we're doing this, it is that question of we're not converting, we're not necessarily becoming outdoorsy purely in the way that a dominant model says you should be outdoorsy. We're not conservation and environmentalists purely in the way that a traditional dominant model might say you should. So it's not a conversion, it's a co-creation. And so that has that invitation of what are we putting into the space? What is that cultura? I used to say, don't want to leave the cultura at the trailhead because sometimes it felt like that. What does it mean to bring your cultura with you in your day pack? And so these are just some of those examples that we would share early on. And as I'm close to the end here these are all early slides that I would share as well, that it's called Yo Cuento because the cuento part is about counting. How do we matter? And cuento as a story. So how do we matter with the story that we're sharing out there, that we are representing? And so a lot of these early interactions were about representation and seeing ourselves reflected and represented in this, in the workspaces, in the recreation, multi-generational families, and that a lot of that early base continues to today. What are the outings and how are these done in partnerships with organizations? What are the trainings that build the professional development capacity of our volunteer leaders? Something like being able to provide wilderness first aid. And what is the Yo Cuento narrative, right? How are we showcasing that all of this diversity of, as I would say, that the diversity of the cultural identity with the diversity of outdoor experiences. And that is the connection that Latino Outdoors was grounded on. And so a lot of this came with all of these early interactions and people seeing themselves represented and reflected on that. And so to the end here, I have this pa delante, because to have all these early interactions, and here's a good representation of that. But now, back then, when I went on to Google and I type in the search engine, Latinos in the outdoors, very scarce. Now you do this. By the way, I just did this today, so you could see a good example. And this is it. Type in Latinos outdoors. This is what is visible. It is the community. It is the volunteer leadership. It is the national staff. It is the partnerships. It is representation in these different platforms. Outside Magazine with the National Park Service, climbing magazines. Some of the amazing initiatives that in terms of opening in new places that people would always ask, but it takes the community to make that happen, like Latino Outdoors Miami. I love the little addition to the logo there. The celebration of 10 years, to know that we started with me as one individual leading some hikes to now having Luis Villa as our executive director, a national team, staff, and volunteer leaders across the country. To amazing initiatives like Semillitas Outdoors, right, that has the support and focus for the youth. And there's Luis over there in the corner. I'm over in the other corner. And seeing a lot of just the work that has developed into the framework of Latino Outdoors, right, that really looks at how are you connecting people to people in these outdoor spaces, people to the places, the diversity of outdoor experiences, people to the process, how to do this safe and enjoyably, and people to the policy. So right there, you see that little Explore Act passes Congress. And what's our role in that? Knowing we're not an advocacy organization per se, but what we do matters in terms of how it affects those spaces. And so I'm going to leave you with this, because I think for me, the work of Latino Outdoors has been critical for me to continue to expand and invite people into, I call it the healing the severed connections that we have with each other and with the land. And so this kind of like, if you're familiar with Michael Pollan, the writer, when in the Omnivore's Dilemma, he said, eat food, not so much, mostly vegetables. And so for me, it's like this: be with nature, as nature, in radical and revolutionary balance. So let's get out in nature, because any time we spend out there, every dosage has an effect. As nature, to kind of challenge and question that separation from nature. So how are we a part of nature and not apart from nature? And then in radical and revolutionary balance is to kind of lean into that language of ecology. And so we're really going to be radical, even interrogating what that word is, which is the root of the word radical is raíz. So how can we be radical? By being rooted in the work, not necessarily be thought of radical as an external agitator. And revolutionary by being complicit in regenerative cycles, because the root of the word revolutionary is una revolución, a cycle. And so what does it mean to be complicit in regenerative cycles? Because that's what heals the planet. And it's when we break these regenerative cycles that we end up in our environmental messes. So I'll close by this reminder. This was also from the early presentations, because, guided by the work of Dolores Huerta, the expression "si se puede," yes, we can, right? That would come up in a lot of different expression, and it's a cultural marker, "si se puede." But I think what's beautiful about the work of Latino Outdoors and all the volunteer leaders and all the team, what they're accomplishing is this aspect, pero hazlo. I think if we weren't guided by that, Latino Outdoors would still be an idea. And I don't think it would exist in the way that it does today. And I'm so grateful to everybody that has contributed to have this exist in to the point that it now exists what I needed 10 years ago. And when I was out looking for this, it wasn't there. And now we've all played a part in having it exist. So with that, I'll pause, say gracias, and we'll move to Q&A.
Oh, mil gracias, Jose. That was wonderful. Thanks for taking us on that journey. I do want to invite all of our participants this evening to go ahead and use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and go ahead. And if you have questions for Jose, we would love to give him the opportunity to respond to you. And so if you want to go ahead and take a minute and think about that and see what great questions you have. But I'm going to start off because I do have a question for you, Jose. I know one of the things for me growing up as a Mexican American was doing things multi-generationally. And, how was it where, young children, along with their parents, the tios, tias, primos, grandparents, did things together. And, how has that come along in your view in terms of getting Latinos into outdoor spaces, but doing it multi-generationally?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to answer this in one of two ways. Um, Part of it was that, you know, because sometimes there tended to be such a focus on like, let's get youth outdoors. Right? And so early questions like, well, is Latino Outdoors a youth serving organization? Yes, but not yet, not only a youth serving organization. We do serve youth through the family experience, which for some programs was kind of like a what? Um, but that matters because to the second part, we would say, especially in some families, the kids may have the experiences, but why can't the parents also have the experiences if they might not have those? And I remember distinctly trying to got invited by a school district to try to encourage a lot of the Latino parents, and a lot of them are immigrant parents, to allow their kids to go on a nature bitch program, right? And they brought me in because I could maybe do the convincing. At the end, the parents were like, absolutely, we get it, it's valuable. But then they said, when do we go? And it was like that reminder of like, absolutely, because you see the value in terms of the kids now being able to come back with this experience and having the parent also have a connecting experience for that. And you can maybe understand what the value of being a park ranger could, what that means as a profession and career. But also, I think out on the trail, one of my favorite moments is we were out hiking in LA, one of the first hikes out there, and having a grandma, like well, first having the fourth grader try to share with the grandma, this is where I learned in class, right? Like, look, I can like identify all these things, but then having the grandma then share her experience and say, oh yeah, I'm familiar with this because growing up, this is what we used this for. And so it's like those interactions are just powerful. And I think and they don't happen unless we don't support family and intergenerational experiences.
Thanks.
I have a few questions coming in. First is from Melissa. Melissa says, hi, I'm in San Diego, and I was wondering how I can get involved with Latino Outdoors.
That's a fantastic question because you happen to be in a place that has an amazing team, which San Diego. So all you have to do, and of course, I know Christian Lamont, I believe, is here in the audience, so he can chime in. But you can start by going to the website, latino.outdoors.org. You look at the About Us, you'll see that San Diego's listed there. You'll see the people individual. If you're on social media like Instagram, type in Latino Outdoors San Diego, you'll see a team there as well. So there's an amazing team there, and just reach out.
Another one from Lauren. Lauren says, thank you so much for your presentation and for honoring our people and ancestors and our connection to the land. And for your deep insight on how our people currently live and making sure our history is not erased. Can you please share the slide again about the books?
Yes, so maybe what I can do is queue it up and then do a quick share, but I'll also mention the books. So there we go. Okay, so here we go. I will share very quickly so you can see it. It is, and this is just two of the books, of course. Environmentalism and Economic Justice, the Chicano struggles in the Southwest. Laura Pulido, who's an amazing researcher, professor. And so this is just one of her several books. Her, along with Yvonne Peña, I think have done a lot of work around this. And then this other one's Robert Gottlieb, Forcing the Spring. So the transformation of the American environmental movement. So these are just kind of two starting points. There's also more book options. I believe there's some up on the Latino Outdoors webpage, but if not, those can be shared out. Another one, fantastic one, is called Latinx Environmentalisms by Sarah, and I just forgot her last name, but look it up, Latinx Environmentalism, and you'll see that pop up.
Clementina asks, what do you recommend as I start my Latino art walk therapy? What organization should I reach out to for support in the San Francisco Bay Area?
Well, another great team in the San Francisco Bay Area. So there's an amazing Latino Outdoors team here. I believe I saw Aurora Cortez right there in the audience. So same thing, kind of go to the website, look up the Instagram. And part of this is we often say it doesn't necessarily have to be Latino Outdoors. That is the team, but because they're connected to a lot of peer organizations, that sometimes can be a great connection to finding other organizations that could be a good fit. But Aurora is a fantastic resource as well.
I have a question from Raul. Does Latino Outdoors work/collaborate with local nonprofits to ensure that there's representation with staff, practices, and policies, especially for the Latino serving nonprofits? If so, what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Um, Interestingly enough, probably I would, I can be corrected, but I'll argue few to no, very few to maybe in a lot of spaces, no um, programs or outings, Latino outdoors, are done purely by and for Latino outdoors, so to speak. There's been such a power in partnership from the beginning. So that has provided an opportunity, right, to kind of have this cross-pollination. But also with other Latina serving organizations, or like with an organization that maybe focuses on immigrant services, and because they haven't had the opportunity to be invited for some of the outdoor experiences. So that is definitely one way. Um, and so I would recommend you to reach out. I think we have the email on the website as well. Sometimes it's as easy as info@latino.outdoors.org. But any of the individuals that are listed on there. And again, Christian Lamont is here. He specializes in a lot of the comms. But if you also look at the annual report that Latino Outdoors has been putting out, Ruby, their amazing job putting that out. You'll see on the end of the page, like this is who we coordinated and collaborated for the past year, and you just see the list of organizations.
Ariane says, I love hearing about outdoor intergenerational experiences. Is there an outdoor experience that is still a goal for the program to do?
Yeah. I'll answer this in one of two ways, right? One is I won't speak to some of the announcements, right, that the national team may be unveiling. But for example, you saw me reference Semillitas Outdoors, right, as a way that, of course, youth were always part of the experience, and Semillitas continues to that. But I think what you see there is the leadership that a lot of the Semillitas, a lot of the kids are showcasing and displaying through part of this experience. So I would say definitely look more for that, and probably continuing to support and expand the different types of experience that you can have. Because sometimes people may presume, oh, this is just hiking, this is just camping. I'm like, well, hiking and camping have a lot of power to them, but not knowing that there's other experiences like rafting, snowshoeing, uh, things that may not be new for some, but they're very new experiences for others. And so that makes them both innovative and powerful. So, like skiing, as an example, is one of those that I think you'll continue to see more, so that people do feel themselves represented in the very wide experiences, set of experiences.
Christina is asking how they can get involved in Sacramento.
Yeah. Um, Fantastic. There's a team there as well. The LO, I think technically the name is LO Central Valley. I just saw them post a picture that they were doing a planning meeting. So that's probably a perfect time to reach out to them right now. So Latino Outdoors, Central Valley, so LO Central Valley, but they have a core team in Sacramento.
My gosh, we're getting a lot of questions. Awesome. Do you, Jose, or anyone from Latino Outdoors do in-person presentations for nonprofits to talk about Latino Outdoors and representation?
Yes, short answer is yes. So here's an example where it's not in person, it's virtual. But I think it's just a matter if you have a local team that you have individuals that reach out and show up. So like Aurora, I won't speak for her or Valen, tell her. But I, of course, when it's doable, I do that as well.
I really like this question from Emily. What are some ways you have found to empower young people to not be discouraged by the current climate, but to be a part of the solution?
Yeah, great question. I have been responding to different variations on that question. And I will say this in three ways, right? One is a reminder that I would say structurally in the systemic design is for you as an individual to feel helpless and powerful. Because if you are, then nothing changes. Right? And so it's remembering that what you can contribute something to systemic change, and that it's not all on you. And yet, having say that, when you are aligned with many others in that way, then you're actually kind of leaning into the power of the collective to do that. But it starts with you actually remembering and acting on that. Second is that I mentioned, or at the beginning, that systemic change model that had structural, relational, and mental models. Um, you don't always have to focus on one of those, but also don't only just focus on one of those. Because sometimes you might focus on mind shifts, being part of things that change the picture for people. But other times you might be focusing on policy changes, and that's okay. But sometimes people don't do that and forget. They think that just happens until we clearly see and find out that it requires people showing up for those spaces, acting in those spaces for that change to continue. And relationally, of course, that you can't do it alone. And so you have to be connected to others in community. And I think the power of what Latino Outdoors represents is what I call mycelial leadership, to think about all of the connections you have to nurture and have going on so that the mushroom that pops up, that's not the totality of it. There's a lot more under there. But the mushroom that you see might be the project, it might be the organization, it might be the event, but it's relying on all that connection and leadership that's connected. So they're little reminders to the worst that you can do is feel alone and not do anything.
Arturo asks, recently got into surfing and my sister told me it was a white thing. I explained to her about the surf communities I saw in Nayarit and she was surprised. What differences in the perception, or what are the differences in the perception of the demographics of different outdoor recreation activities in the US versus Mexico?
It's a good question because um, it's not just surfing, right? It's skiing, it's backpacking, it's acknowledging that you can have new things in some ways, but they're actually grounded on older ancestral things. And you can still have ancestral things influence new things. So what I mean by that is, yes, totally okay and very real that you can hear and experience things like, well, that's not for us. That's a white people thing, right? Or that's a rich people thing. That's a whatever fill in the blank other thing. And that may be true in some spaces based on those experiences, right? And it is now much more visible to see amazing through hikers. You have, through hikers in the US from Mexico that are completing like the Triple Crowns. You can follow Instagram accounts of people like backpacking, um, backpacking through mountains and volcanoes in Mexico and Monterrey and the like. So I always look at, again, try to resist that either or and really look at what that both and is, knowing that, of course, unfortunately, we're still going to be facing a lot of the dominant narrative at times.
Um, Someone says, thank you for sharing your story and experience. I wanted to add to Ms. Royer's question in regards to intergenerational experiences and language barriers. How do I explain to my family and relatives, older generations, why it matters and dealing with different experiences and beliefs/priorities? I don't want to make them feel bad for not understanding and feel bad in return.
Yeah, I mean, so many times I would face that question, right? Do your parents know what you do? No. And that's okay. And yes, what could they connect to that makes sense for them? And so knowing it's an ongoing conversation, right? That's exactly that. And not that either or. And so I say that because yes, it's not about making them feel bad, and also knowing that's not necessarily your full responsibility. Um, the kind of the outdoor engagement is just one part of it. I'll give this as an example of that's connected to the outdoors, but also didn't start from the outdoors, and that is, what did it mean for me to not perpetuate the harms that my parents experienced, that could be like traumatic generational trauma. So what I mean by that is, maybe my parents, like, the best we can do is this. We don't know what that means for you, but we will always care about you and support you. And with my dad, it meant like, okay, this is the best that I learned about being a dad, and maybe I'll continue to learn. But then it's up to me to kind of model and practice with him what I think could be a healthier relationship. And so with the outdoor stuff, it'd be the similar thing, right? To say, well, let me share this with you, but have it be grounded and connected with things that we know we mutually care about. And so that has been really helpful, so that it's never felt like I am detaching from or like adding to a separation.
I have a question. One physical or policy change that parks, state, national, county, and other can make is to build more group campsites since Latino Americans and perhaps other BIPOC communities prefer extended family outings to individual or couple-oriented ones. What suggestions do you have on how Latino Outdoors can work with park managers to affect this kind of change?
Yeah. The great thing is it's already happening. So in some ways that has become a classic case study, right, of the campsite or of the picnic tables, and who are they designed for, what types of families. So I would say that that engagement is already happening. And for any that are interested, show up where and how you can. If you can show up to the Parks Commission meeting, show up to that. If we tell people policy, people can hear policy and think, oh, it means advocating for laws by going to DC, for example. It can, but policy are people decisions. And that really means saying, how are you a part of influencing what those people decisions are? And it can be everything from telling your neighbor about it all the way to doing a DC fly-in. So there's a lot that can happen in there. But again, it depends about how you are able to and can show up. Not everyone can show up in the same way, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a way that you're able to show up.
Alyssa asks, what can communications and programming staff at land conservancies do to ensure they're reaching the diverse communities in their region?
Yeah. Again, I would say look at that systemic change model and maybe start with yourself. Remember that question that I mentioned, that you might have a question, say, oh, how can we, how can we get the Latino community to care about this? Again, flip some of those and say, um, how do they care and we don't know about it? How are we willing to power share, with some of the things? How are we willing to resource? terms of money, staff or time? How are we willing to listen and learn? What presumptions might we be starting from that we haven't looked at, examined, or interrogated? So those are all like maybe different starting points.
I have a question from John. John says we first met at the Sierra Club Award ceremony when I was honored. My name is John Sanders, and I've been trying to find ways to collaborate with Latino Outdoors through my outdoor science summer camps at Delphinus School of Natural History. We have room for scholarships, but we don't have transportation funds. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah. Well, the great thing is Celeste is there in the area. And transportation, unfortunately, is one of the harder pieces for sure. Having said that, work has been slowly happening, right? At the state kind of funding level, the work, the fight and the work and the challenge continues to fund things like the Outdoor Equity Grants Program, for which funding can apply to transportation. So that would be one example. And then having organizations, I'm not familiar with the one that would be down there, but like in the Bay Area, Utes is kind of an example. So it is happening, but I agree though that transportation tends to be one of the more structural systemic barriers.
Um, from Crystal, our comunidad already faces so many barriers to the outdoors, including overcoming the stigma of sleeping outdoors, as you mentioned earlier. This political landscape will now add another barrier. What advice do you have for leaders to support communities at this time? Perhaps resources or other readings for us to study?
Yeah, I won't, I want to be clear that the both and for me is highly recognizing how hard this is right now. And so I want to make sure that no one ever feels like that's being um, diminished because it's not. It's very real. And it's not the first time. I grew up during the and high intense anti-immigrant political climate of California in the 90s. So I remember very well what it meant to experience this. So again, that and that I for myself um, don't want to impose self-limitation on what some of the opportunities experiences are, and that you can be surprised at how there can be many interactions at which you can be a change agent. I will give you one example from a few years ago. We were doing an outing in the Central Valley, and one adult, came up and asked, is like, do we need like any particular type of paperwork to participate in this? And it took me about a minute to kind of really click and realize what she was asking. And for that, it was having that conversation with her and others to really stress the part about what we were doing to have this be a safe experience. And so, for example, I know a lot of the Latino leaders are involved both in work and internally within the organization to have the resources, right, to at minimum really think about what the support responsibility there is.
It looks like Celeste is answering, but Jerry asks, are the programs multilingual, visual, and hands-on, inclusive with handicapped?
Yeah, so Celeste is answering the short answer is yes. And it comes with the incorporated feedback from the community.
And then one last question here. It looks like, do you have any advice for Latinos that are interested in leadership roles, such as through a membership or board roles in non-governmental organizations focused on conservation and outdoor education and access to the outdoors?
I mean, absolutely. Please. A lot of these organizations need you. Um, and so for myself, right, I've been a board member at National Outdoor Leadership School at Knowles with the Outdoor Industry Association, National Recreation Foundation, um, mentioning how right now I'm still on the Boating and Waterways Commission, on the Parks California board. And all of these for me weren't to say, oh, I need these for my own self-advancement. Oh, I need to leverage these for my career. Totally okay if you do, But what I was getting at is for me, I was looking at these as the same thing. How are these spaces that we can influence so that if for any of this I'm the first one, I shouldn't be the last one. And so how can I shape these places so that others that come after me can be part of this? So I would say that A, if you're interested, reach out, look at what organization that might be. Two, ask questions and don't devalue yourself to start. A lot of board spaces may seem like you're already supposed to know how to be there and operate and whatnot, but that's not necessarily true. And you have individuals like myself and Celeste and others that you can reach out and ask and be able to say, what does board service look like? And then lastly is that reminder that, yeah, it comes with responsibility. Um, but for me, it's that reminder that um, for a lot of us, we don't do this purely for like the individual aspect. We do this because we know we are representative of others into a community. And so I remember that how even in those spaces, how can I continue to remind myself that I'm not the voice for the community, I'm a voice for the community.
It looks like we have a very sweet note of gratitude from Natalie, and then I think that's all the questions we have. We're right on time, 7:01.
Yeah.
Any last comments?
Yeah, I did want to share one thing too, Jose. Um, I'm in that older category, again, having retired. And there are individuals like me from the Latino community who very much want to serve as mentors and provide support to younger professionals or to youth, kids still in school. And it's something that gives us, heartfelt satisfaction to be in that position. And I know I am not the only one. I know that among all the Latino outdoors volunteers across the country, there are people who, definitely want to be there to engage not just members of the Latino community, but everybody in
Mm-hmm.
terms of appreciating our environment, our open spaces, our green spaces. We do want them to connect with the natural world because we do want to, pass on something, for future generations in terms of preservation and conservation. It's the mission of the Central Coast State Parks Association, part of Latino Outdoors. And so, do look to your elders, I will say, in your community, for that kind of engagement.
Yeah, without question. If it wasn't for individuals like Celeste, it that has shaped me from the beginning and being able to look at and be able to say I have mental, mentors and role models, and that it's that relationship, right? That's part of the cultural element that I think we contribute to this for everybody. And so we tell like with Latino Outdoors, everyone's welcome. There's no Latino card. You have to show up at the beginning. And we say you're invited into a focused conversation around this community, but it's for everyone. And so when you have an offer like what Celeste is making, then it's your responsibility to follow up and take it off. Because I can speak for myself how um, grateful I am for what she's offered to me.
Well, thank you so much, Jose. Thank you, Celeste. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We hope you enjoyed and learned something new. So, once again, we encourage all of you to get involved with your local state parks, get involved with their coordinating associations. To learn more about CSPA and Latino Outdoors, please visit our website, and we hope you guys have a great night.
Thank
Muy
you,
buenas
everyone.
noches a todos.
Gracias, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.